Thanks for coming out and listening to my presentation. And it's entitled The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow, so endless energy is available for POL 581. The problem that I'm observing is that the world supply of fossil fuels is limited. This is based on numerous scientific studies and papers that have been published. Uh, the world is based around fossil fuels in numerous ways, and there are limited alternative sites and investments for energy. The paradox that we're facing is that the sources that produce a high energy yield are too costly to pursue, but the sources that are affordable to follow through on provide insufficient yields, which make many parties disinterested in searching for alternatives. The question I'm looking into is, are people willing to make a switch from a fossil fuel-based energy source, given oil depletion, to a renewable source, taking into account investment costs and price increases? Secondary question is, what investment costs or increases in price are acceptable to people and still undertake the switch? Points of agreement for all sides are that fossil fuels are the backbone for many aspects of the world, including heating, energy, transportation, and consumer electronics. Fossil fuels assisted in the world making massive leaps forward globally, and fossil fuels helped build the United States as we know it, helping to expand industry and create new markets. And fossil fuels have helped win and end wars for thousands of years, starting in hundreds of years BC, where oil was used in assaulting castles and villages by projecting fire, all the way up to today, where bombs are used and vehicles use gasoline and oil. Points of disagreement are how much oil remains to be harvested through drilling on land, fracking, or deepwater drilling, the effect that fossil fuels have on the environment, the feasibility of deepwater drilling, either warm or cold water, and the efficiency of alternative energies. With deepwater drilling, we have cold water, which is primarily seen with the Exxon Valdez spill, though it is not actually a drilling accident. It was a spill. We can see the effects of trying to gather the oil from this ocean. The spill happened in 1985, so 29 years ago. Estimates for the spill are placed at 11 million gallons, but some place it as high as 55 million gallons. The Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trust Council, which oversees the restoration of the Prince William Sound ecosystem, says that the oil that persists in the environment is nearly as toxic as it was the first few weeks after the spill, and is weathering or degrading very slowly. Warm water extraction can be seen with British Petroleum, or BP, in 2010. BP originally claimed that between 1 and 5,000 barrels of oil spilled. 1 year later, conservative estimates placed that at 200 million barrels of oil. And for your information, a barrel is roughly 40 to 42 gallons. After Exxon Valdez, Congress passed an Oil Pollution Act in 1990, which required parties to clean up the affected area and imposed penalty regulations. For ships like the Exxon Valdez, it was $10 million, and for offshore facilities, it was $75 million, and created the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. However, 25 years later, the penalties had not been changed or altered due to inflation. For the same financial impact to be felt, the ships regulation would have to be $16.5 million. But with the $10 million penalty, that's a financial impact of $6.07 million presently. And for the offshore facilities, the previous $75 million penalty is really only worth $45.5 million. And for it to really be worth $75 million of 1985 or 1990 his value, it would have to be $123.5 million. The cost to switch from the current infrastructure of fossil fuels, either oil or natural gas, is highly dependent on the area and incentives. Many forms of alternative energy are not viable everywhere. It would not be financially or economically accessible. And the cost to buy the technology is often too expensive to allow the transition. Solar system large enough to supply energy to an average home, which would require 920 kilowatt hours a month, would cost between zero or nothing because of federal, state, or city rebates to $53,000, compared to $63,000, which an average household would spend in over 21 years for quote unquote dirty electricity, assuming that electric costs rise at an average of 4% per year. And in September of 2014, National Grid announced that Massachusetts residents are facing a 37% increase this year alone in electrical and energy costs. So that 4% annual increase on average is far below what we could actually expect to see. The energy sources that are currently being used, fossil fuels account for over 3/4 of the energy that we produce, and the largest renewable energy source is still combustible based, so it is not as clean or reliable. And hydroelectric, which is one of the best sources, is only 2.2% of the energy that is used globally. And nuclear, which is the second most efficient sources of energy that is renewable, is only less than 6%, and even then it is not as clean or reliable as other sources. This chart demonstrates the energy density of fuels. We want a more dense fuel because that would yield a more rich source of energy. We can see that diesel and biodiesel have the highest, except they're still only going up to at highest 40. And gas, which most people use, is only at around 35. This shows the energy return on energy investment, or EROEI. And you can see that the domestic oil production in the US in the 1930s was around 100 units return for every unit used. During the 70s, that dropped down to between 30 to 40. In domestic oil in 2005 was only at between 10 and 15. The average of all U.S. sources in 2005 was between 35 and 45. In the estimated minimum to be viable, according to this chart, is 10 units returned for every unit invested. This shows a comparison of fossil fuels and alternative energy in their return. You can see that the fossil fuels are a finite resource, and that the coal is the highest density here with a energy return of 50. But coal is also an incredibly dirty source of energy. You can see hydroelectric has an outstanding return of up to 267 units per 1 unit invested, but the hydroelectric sources or sites that would yield that high return have already been tapped, such as the Hoover Dam. And the sources that we have available now would only yield maybe 15 to 20 units return. This shows the energy return on liquid fuels. You can see that oil has a 19 unit return, and ethanol has up to an 8% or 8 unit return, and biodiesel has a 9 unit return. You can see here the gas taxes imposed by different countries. The United States has about a one-third or $half tax per gallon, whereas European and Asian nations have between a $2.50 to a $4 tax per gallon sold when converted from a per liter to a per gallon charge. And Mexico actually subsidizes the cost per gallon by roughly a third to a quarter of a dollar. The survey questions I'm looking into are: what type of property do you use? Either a house or an apartment, a business, a purely investment property, or an undeveloped land? Do you rent or own the property? How long have you had or are planning on having the property? And I need a full representation of the residents or the survey participants. So I plan on using the high school so that teachers can have students take it home to obtain information from students and families, town hall to get administrator, policymaker, and people who do not have children's input, senior citizens to get senior citizen input, or who have been overlooked by the first two methods, or by having a stand at town events to get other people who might have been overlooked by the other methods. My other questions include: have you made any investments or changes to the property? Yes or no, with open-ended surveys or boxes of what have you done to the property, or no, and if no, why not? Because you don't see anything that needs to be changed, or you don't own, so you don't want to make the investments. Do you believe that the world supply of usable oil is being depleted? Would you be willing to invest in other sources assuming a price point is equal to or lower than what you're currently paying? And then, would you be willing to invest in other energy sources assuming a price point that is somewhat higher than what you're paying, but ending your dependence on fossil fuels? And then the demographics of what I'm looking at. So, what are the ages of residents of your household? What is the approximate income? What is the highest level of education? And I'm looking at these questions because I need to see where the participants lay. Because if they're a senior citizen, they might have a lower income than other households, so they would not be as financially able to make the switch. Or if they're only renting, they're less likely to make an investment in the property or the town. The policymakers or administration are more likely to favor making a change if residents want the change, but if they're initially not willing to or don't want to make the change, the feelings of the residents or voters would make a difference in the overall decision or voting. And thank you, and I hopefully stayed underneath that 15 minutes. Have a great day.